Good morning or good evening, depending on which time zone you are in. This is Tim Chen, Dean of Engineering at HKUST. I'm very pleased to introduce to you our second edition of HKUST Entrepreneurship Fireside Chat series. This is a live discussion series featuring seasoned tech entrepreneurs and investors whose experience, vision, and ideas can benefit the next generation technology leaders and who have great passion to help nurture young tech entrepreneurs in Hong Kong and enrich our entrepreneurship education. We had a great turnout for our first edition held a month ago. And again, we have many participants here today. Welcome. With this fireside chat format, in addition to listening to the conversations between the moderator and the featured guest, please use the chat function so that we can also see your comments and responses. For today's chat, we are very honored to have Ms. Edith Yeung, who is a Hong Konger, a venture capitalist, and a technology executive. As a previous partner at 500 Startups and the current general partner at Silicon Valley Venture Capital Fund, Raise Capital, she has invested over 2,000 companies, including several successfully grown into unicorns, and many led to public offerings and acquisitions. It is a frequent guest lectures at Berkeley and Stanford, and a commentator at BBC, CNBC, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, SCMP, TechCrunch, etc., speaking on China and the Silicon Valley technology investment landscape. So with her rich experience, it will be hugely beneficial to hear from her insights on today's topic, how to build the next global unicorn of Hong Kong. So we are once again very honored to have Professor Jack Lau as our moderator today. Jack is the chairman of Swarmland.ai, and Jack has several unique experiences. He was HKUST's very first PhD graduate, a professor, a successful entrepreneur, and currently an HKUST Council member. So I'm sure you all will enjoy today's exciting conversation. Thank you. So now let me switch the mic over to Jack.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology Fireside Chat. It was not too long ago, we had a very exciting discussion, and today we're continuing this tradition of ours, although we're meeting virtually. Today's topic is really fun. Any of the keyword that you pick up from the title is worthy for joining. Unicorn, yes, we all want to be unicorn. The next unicorn, how to build it, and actually in Hong Kong. So the topic of today is how to build the next global unicorn of Hong Kong. And we're very honored to have Edith. So good morning, Edith. How are you?
Hi, Jack. How are you? I'm doing great.
So Edith, now you're in San Francisco, and you have been jetting back and forth. I'm sorry that the pandemic is sort of slowing down your jetting back and forth, but it looks like you're not slowing down at all with your activities. So before we begin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your view on the current entrepreneurship landscape from your vantage point sitting in Silicon Valley right now?
I think it's been a very, very challenging 6 months, actually more than 6 months now. My original plan was to come back to Hong Kong right after Chinese New Year's. I was going to just come back to San Francisco for a few weeks, but apparently I'm still here after 7 months or so. And it's been super interesting mostly because of COVID. Funding activities have slowed down quite a bit. I think it's obviously started with China. Compared to the Q1 China compared to last year, in general, in terms of number of deals and the total dollar in terms of funding had dropped 30 to 40%. And for the US, particularly in Silicon Valley, is definitely following China's footstep, although that wave is about 3 to 4 months behind because as you guys can probably see on the news, US is still in big trouble in terms of number of cases. And it's unfortunate, like a lot of people still arguing about whether you should wear a mask or not. which is super interesting. So I think this whole phenomenon, particularly for the US, what we've been seeing is that, particularly for early stage, valuation, actually we counted yesterday on the total number of deals that we have looked at for these past few months. Actually, just today, I literally talked to about 10 companies from all over the world, just today alone. There's still a lot of companies raising money, but we think that what we have seen is valuation have dropped, particularly for early stage, about 30% or so since the pandemic started. And I think like this phenomenon will continue because Silicon Valley is not going to open any of the office, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, you named it. They're all going to continue to be closed until at the end of the year. So the whole dynamic of what's going on, particularly in Silicon Valley, is not so good. Having said that, I do think Asia, particular China, Hong Kong, a lot of, actually most of my friends in Beijing, Shanghai, everything is already open. They've been in the office for the last couple of months. So I do think recovery, we will see happening in Asia much more sooner than we see in the US. So it's exciting to see. So I can't wait to come back and Hong Kong to see all of you guys in person.
That's great to know, Edith. You mentioned about the valuation, it's going down, the funding amount is going down, but yet you're seeing a lot of companies. And I must add that, you know, despite all this turmoil, the stock market is doing crazily well. TSMC, AMD, extremely buoyant, and Intel, unfortunately, is taking a downbeat. So if you're looking for deals, what do you look for? What are the key areas you evaluate to make a decision these days under the current situation of COVID-19?
Yeah, so I think in Chinese, 有危就有機, and we think that this crisis actually create a lot of really super interesting opportunities. Just to start, actually, even though we basically in the US, everybody been stuck at home. And by the way, for all the entrepreneur and founders, I can tell you all the VCs are stuck at home in the US. So it probably will be a really good time for you to pitch them that normally you may not even find them. But we think that any pandemic actually created a lot of really interesting opportunity to start. Actually, one of my investments went IPO a few weeks ago. It's called Agora.io. They are video infrastructure as a service. So basically Zoom as a service, if you can imagine, but for education, for telehealth. And you can pretty much think about anything sort of and enable the future of work or remote learning, remote telehealth, or education are all booming. And in fact, this is a time that we don't actually have a choice. You have to use these tools. And so sort of overall longer term, we think that a lot of the consumer behavior, we don't know. Like obviously we see gaming has a huge boom. But honestly, like if I have a chance to meet you, Jack and Tim, Diana, face to face, I will still prefer that as a consumer. But for businesses and for enterprise, we think that this behavior is here to stay. Most of the enterprise cannot afford to let pandemic happen, to have such a huge disruption for them anymore. So we're very, very excited about a lot of the video infrastructure, anything like related to data privacy, because now a lot of the work from home situation, IT department is going crazy. Like what kind of tools are you using that can safeguard in terms of security and data privacy? I think those are all very interesting. And we think that there's a lot of sort of back-end infrastructure enterprise, a lot of the API infrastructure for finance. We're big on fintech, but not necessarily consumer type app. But we think that particularly in the US, all these systems are still so backwards. And many of them, because they boomed so early, are still running on mainframe, which is kind of insane if you think about it. So we think that there's a lot of really interesting sort of enterprise infrastructure tech that we are super excited about.
Well, Edith, you're talking to a dinosaur. I started my engineering career writing COBOL for mainframe. So I know what you mean. Those were the good old times. But Edith, let me ask you a question. I mean, can it possibly be like a seesaw kind of situation that right now, because of pandemics, we have video conferencing, yes, we use more, so the valuation goes sky high, but as you said, we do, after all, prefer to meet face to face. So hopefully, eventually, with the pandemics under control, would this hot topic be less hot, be something back to the ordinary and normal? And how do you as a VC gauge that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And just sort of looking at, obviously, at one Agora, which went IPO with the ticker API, I think is amazing. Great name. Because of the pandemic, their revenue and their growth is insane in the last few months. But I really don't think this behavior would never necessarily go away. At least with all the, it doesn't matter you're in China or you're in the US, even Zoom is amazing, which is also a Chinese entrepreneur, built a very, very successful enterprise in the US. But not everybody actually want to run their entire business on Zoom. And just imagine the way that we talk now, or even for HKUST, right? Even we're having this conversation, the concept of collaboration or whiteboarding, or maybe, I don't know, you guys use Blackboard or whiteboard anymore. But if you wanted to show certain documents, there's still a lot of things that can be improved. I don't think that just one tool is good enough for classroom. There's a lot of room for growth. But again, I think consumer behavior, if we can be normal, I'd rather meet you in person. But I do think that industry, regardless of the banks, the hospital, education, like all these sort of, you would think that it's a traditional industry, they really is like they get pushed, and almost there's no more, you don't even think about, oh, is this compliance, or is the regulator going to let me do it? I don't have a choice, I have to do it. So therefore, once it's instrumented, the IT department will need to continue to support it, because just in case, all the businesses need to have a online risk management processes and procedure. Otherwise, who knows? We're already seeing, well, US have not even over the first wave yet, and we're talking about second or third wave. So I think this is, at least in the US, will last for another year or so.
Well, yeah, that's great. But I want to be as straightforward as possible. In the technology sector, there's always a mantra that is the winners take all. Look at video conferencing. Surely there are a lot of other solutions, but it's clearly who it comes out to be the dominant player. In technology sector, it's always the first mover that you talk about, maybe a fast follower, but there's certainly not a fourth a follower. So having said that, and the pandemic has already begun, if we were a startup, and specifically in Hong Kong, would it be too late for us? What other areas are possible? It seems like every box has been ticked. I mean, you and I are doing, by the way, we still have chalkboard somewhere in Hong Kong, so it's not just whiteboard or blackboard. So you remember your days in Hong Kong when you were attending school. So the question is really, then what should we do? Hong Kong is a very small place. We are sandwiched in between the Western world and the Chinese market. What should be the strategy so that we can attract great investors like yourself?
I think, well, first and foremost, because like today we're, like you and I both Hong Konger, and I love Hong Kong. I grew up in Wan Chai. My parents still live there, and this is like my home. And just to begin with, I actually think that if you think about, like, Jack, I think you were talking about you were working on COBOL, and you definitely remember the days when Google didn't exist. And when Google started, Yahoo was already around, and they were the giants, like in terms of search. So if you think about it, even like for Google, it wasn't a category that is necessarily brand new. Is really just doing certain things a little bit better, with better usability, better indexing, and a better UI. And so in some sense, I don't want to anchor, even though obviously we talked about what raise capital is excited about. I get excited with easily, but no one should build a company just because a VC want you to and think is a good idea. You can't live your life because somebody else tell you to. And trust me, we're all mostly in this room, it's all Chinese kids. I know all my parents still want to tell me I don't have a real job. So in this sense, it's not about building something that you think makes sense or it is because it's the best time or the worst time. It's just something that you really believe in it and you really care about it. And by the way, Jack, like I think that Hong Kong just are not very good at, we're not, because we're very, very humble people. We don't usually talk about, Hong Kong actually have already 8 unicorn that at least I keep track of. And half of them are fintech related. So company like WeLab, BitMax, FTX. FTX is actually one of our companies that moved from California to Hong Kong. And he's American, Sam. Air Wallace, these are all sort of fintech. And of course we have the GoGo Van, Lala Move, more logistics, and SenseTime, more AI, Klook, which is more experience. These are all amazing, amazing companies. And I don't think any VC is say, hey, go start this company and then you'll be fine. And in fact, I will tell you, if somebody tell me, hey, I'm working on this because my investor tell me to, I'm going to run as far away as possible because it's not a problem that you really care about. So as much as I guess pandemic get me excited because I think that it's interesting timing to launch certain things, but the timing is just a trigger point. But hopefully, you know, all of you guys, if you're building a new startup, it's not just because, oh my God, I can't tell you how many companies been pitching us about medical, what do you call it, PPE, like protection gear, because it's the best time. And I'm like, no, we're not interested because yes, COVID will go away. And you got to build something that is long lasting.
No, yeah, that's very interesting. Actually, I'm with you on that. As a matter of fact, I also noticed when you talk about the unicorns in Hong Kong, the 8 of them, it's rather interesting, right? Majority of them, or actually more than half of them as you count, their market space is actually surprisingly in Hong Kong. This is unheard of 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, most Hong Kong companies, technology companies in particular, or people who are manufacturing technologies, they would say that the market has to be in the United States or Europe. And later on, they say, if we do something in Hong Kong, then the market should be in China. And surprisingly, especially the fintech, obviously, they are in Hong Kong. So I want to talk a little bit about how should we encourage startups to look for their most appropriate market. Because of the pandemic, obviously travel is restricted. So some of the startups in travel business right now are in a bit of a struggle. But because of the pandemic, people cannot travel. Then the delivery and all that are doing very well, phenomenally well. But if you have a startup, think of it as a startup where 2 great HKUST students sitting in a room or actually meeting virtually and say, gosh, I listened to Edith's talk, I'm excited, let's go do it. The first thing that they will ask themselves is, who are we going to sell to? How do we sell them? I mean, do you have any advice for the young folks here in Hong Kong?
Jack, this is a really, really awesome question, because I think that a lot of times, like when I actually do a lot of, I have a nonprofit that called Founders Hong Kong. We do a lot of mentorship. The whole goal of us is connect Silicon Valley mentor with Hong Kong founders. And I think this question came up quite a bit during our mentoring session. And usually it is a little bit contrarian, which is, by the way, we know that when you're early stage, and obviously you want to think about long term. Okay, like, is it going to be China? Is it going to be US? Is it going to be Southeast Asia? But when you first start, what I would rather hear is not that, oh my God, like we know we're going to build another DD, and because we're going to do one thing and we're going to be cheaper, or whatever that reason is. I would rather that you have a very, very small subset of people that you know how to make them very, very happy, and a lot of people that sort of semi-happy. So let's say hypothetically you are going after your fintech space, and by the way, I know Hong Kong UST. The last time I came visit, I saw a little brochure for the Hong Kong UST fintech program. So I was like actually super excited. I actually stole one of your brochure because I was kind of thinking we don't even have that in the US. So definitely something to learn from. But the key thing is that regardless you're going after China or going US, is I think when you first start, particularly early stage, you have very limited resource. It's so much better for you to say, look, I was in finance before, and it was so painful for me to do X. And therefore, even though I think at the very beginning, we're going to have a small market, but I'm also thinking about in China, there are going to be more. In the US, there will be more. That kind of dialogue of your understanding of how painful your product is, the pain that you're trying to solve. Like a good analogy would be, we don't want to invest in another vitamin. We want to invest in the painkiller. So it's almost sort of like it's okay at the very beginning to say, hey, we're starting with small market, just Hong Kong, because it's our home turf. And we really understand it. So it's similar to GoGoVan and Lala Move. And then they slowly, actually, two very similar companies, one went up north to China, the other one actually went to Southeast Asia. And both of them are unicorn, and they both do really well. So in some sense, don't worry about have to have all the answer. In fact, sometimes I feel like it's just so much better and show you as a much more pragmatic and genuine person if you say, I don't know. Than trying to say, yeah, I have it all figured out, because it's not possible to figure out everything out so early on.
Well, Edith, you just stole my most favorite saying, so I don't know. Well, it's good to know what you don't know, right? Tell me a bit more. In the Silicon Valley, and actually in Hong Kong, we try to look at Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, San Francisco, and certainly examples such as your previous accelerator, Start 500. Now, in the past, the path to doing a startup seems to be, there seems to be a roadmap. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, there are books written about roadmap to success as a startup. Step one, find someone who is smarter than you. Step two, join an accelerator. Step three, get money from your friends and family. Step four and step five, and so on and so forth. Now, you just say something very interesting and dear to our heart. I mean, you say, follow your passion and do small. But a lot of startups that we met in Hong Kong, or we have talked to, they said they're very discouraged, because when they need money, when they need resources, and when they talk to the VCs being VCs, they will say, tell me, when are we going to see the hockey stick moment? When are we going to see that you're going to convert to millions of users so that we can get our return? Everybody wants to be like the first investor of Google and Facebook, or for HKUST, we want to be the investor for DJI, or any of the unicorn. So isn't that sort of go against their real life experience, or are you actually so different as a VC that your view is different, or this is a time change, or how did they overcome the, I hate to say this, the inevitable initial setbacks?
Yeah, I think that is something that Hong Kong as a community, I think, by the way, I don't necessarily think that Hong Kong need to be the next Silicon Valley. Hong Kong just need to be Hong Kong again. And I feel like the last couple of years, especially the last 12 months, we lost a lot of our mojo. Like in my head of Hong Kong is, Hong Kongers have like can-do spirit. We never take a no for an answer. We're really hardworking, and we don't need to call ourselves the next Silicon Valley or follow the path of what you see in Silicon Valley per se. But having said that, to create, for all of us to work together to build a good ecosystem for Hong Kong. Sometimes as an investor, I do find that because Hong Kong is such a finance hub, the type of question that a financier of a traditional business or trader or investment banker in Hong Kong, the mindset compared to sort of the Silicon Valley investor mindset is a little bit different, because most of the early investor in the Valley, they are usually angel investor that worked in tech company before, not in a bank. And it's very hard to invest in a technology company without understanding the tech. It's really the technology make the high growth startup and not the business. And don't get me wrong, I actually think that it's super interesting to learn about we don't look at a lot of fintech companies, and there are like insurance company will come to us and say, oh yeah, we just get this and we're licensed and we get this deal. And I'm like, there's no tech to this. Why is it a startup? So what makes a startup is really the high growth, and to figure that out sometimes do take some time. So therefore, I do encourage, even though we can talk about ecosystem all day long, but the investor community, particularly in Hong Kong, and by the way, Chinese investors actually have very different mindset. They're quite similar to what we see in the US. But in Hong Kong, sometimes I felt that because a lot of the folks, they're not comfortable with technology. So therefore, they started get really angsty about, when are you going to make money? Trust me, if you are a B2B enterprise, sure, like revenue model, this is only like so many handful of ways to make money. But if you're looking at more consumer startups, most of the consumer startup, like the Facebook, Twitter of the world, is advertising. You can't really make money until you have some substantial user base to get to the point it's even meaningful to turn on monetization. So I think it is a mindset that a lot of the investors, particularly in Hong Kong, need to get used to, because startup is not like traditional business. So it takes a little bit more patience for you to see real dollar sign in terms of revenue.
Well, but Edith, I want to share with you, at least at HKUST, the spirit is really high. We have, of course, produced the seeds of some unicorns in Hong Kong. And if you come back, I'll be happy to show you around the exciting developments in Hong Kong, COVID-19 or not COVID-19. But you are actually hit something that persistently being the topic, the investors, the mentality, how affect the startups and how they can cope with it, to take advantage of it. But also, I think that, as you mentioned, it is 有危有機. So there's also an opportunity, because the investors now in Hong Kong, I believe a lot of them are gradually realizing that there's so much excitement in tech space, be it imitation meat or fintech and this and that. So we just seeing some questions rolling in on Zoom. So I'm going to steal one of the questions. So some audience is asking, they are starting a very lifestyle product and things, and they have about in the mainlands and with friends, and mainly in the mainland. They said, how do you know that is something that will stick? I mean, I guess we don't need to worry about whether it's mainland or 50,000 or 5,000. So this is very, very typical that we see in Hong Kong. As you mentioned, I don't even know whether it's tech. I mean, sometimes we get to ask questions, is it a tech company, is it not a tech company? Well, I guess it's the way you approach the problem. You use a tech to solve the logistics and so on and so forth. So the question from this, I don't know, student and audience is we have an idea. We can sell stuff in China. Given this pandemic, how do I know that I'm onto something? How long do I continue this journey? I mean, if initially it's not successful.
Well, actually, just to start with, is when we look at a company, we often, by the way, like good people will make a bad idea good, but a bad idea is not going to make, it's never about the idea. It's really about the person. And a bad idea, if you're a really good person, you can make it a good idea. So in some sense, I think, and by the way, what we also look for a lot is, why do you want to start a business? By the way, even though I'm really big on supporting founders and supporting young people to be entrepreneurs, there's nothing wrong for getting a job. It is completely fine, actually.
This is what my parents have been telling us, go get a job, Edith.
Yeah, exactly. I still don't have a real job. And it's okay to actually have a job. And in fact, building companies sounds really cool, and of course everybody wanted to be the Mark Zuckerberg, and actually the whole Silicon Valley want to be Steve Jobs, but it's not about being cool. It's actually about, why do you really want to start a company? And honestly, for the first few years, if your goal is to make money, I actually would recommend you just go get a job, because you have to be so, like, your reason of starting certain things is because if it's purely for money, that is very, very tough to build something that you really will like grind this and really like sort of nail it until like you get it right. That sort of spirit takes, and by the way, 99% of the companies, even you raise money, fail. And emotionally, it's so hard. So don't do it if you're really just purely because you want to make a lot of money. But let's say you have a lifestyle business and you really believe in it. You just really, really want to make it happen. And I like to use this analogy because I really miss Hong Kong. I can't wait to go back. I don't know how many of you have been to the beef brisket place in central Gaogay, Alam. And every time I go, no matter what time of the day, there's like a long line, and the place is super small, and they're kind of rude and it's kind of dirty, but because the product is so good, people still line up and they still want it. And in fact, they don't want it any other way. So think about whatever that you're trying to build. The product got to be so good to the point that you can suck at everything else. It doesn't really matter. So if you have that kind of idea, or you can that kind of product, that's why like you got to be that person to build it. And I think we don't invest in lifestyle business, unfortunately, because we don't, like, even if somebody who's like doing consulting on the side or is like doing something like nice on weekend, I'm not saying that it's not a good idea, but we want to see somebody that will be willing to give them their all and to build something. Otherwise, it's very, very tough for like VC to give you money if you don't even want to give 100% of your time to work on this.
That's a dilemma a lot of the startup founders have to deal with. They always say, well, we have our obligations in the family, the rent is so high, I need to make do. But going back to you actually say something fairly interesting. Good people make bad things better. Bad people make good things worse. I don't know if I paraphrase you correctly. I have to think about this in my head. I'm looking in the mirror myself. But anyway, so Edith, what are good people? I mean, I want to do a startup. I mean, I get Professor Tim Chang, the Dean of Engineering. Let's say the two of us want to do a startup. Are we good enough people, or do we need a Edith Yeung to come and help? And is this just a combination kind of thing? Is it background, solid skill sets, mentality, rich uncle, rich auntie? What are good people?
That is an awesome question, because I think on my books, well, by the way, good people, I will answer your question at the same time, because we focus on startup founders and we do particular focus on tech companies, right? So
you end the question with Tim Chang is a very good person, okay? Let me give you a hint.
Company, I can't wait to invest. And so is tech. But the key thing is that for us, because we invest in tech, Therefore, usually the founder we do prefer is somebody with a technical background, because if you're trying to build a tech startup, but you don't understand the tech stack, how do you actually even hire good engineers? It's very, very tough to do. But having said that, a good person, there is many definitions of it, but for us is, well, I also always try to be a man of my words. Like, it's tough to do. Sometimes, like, you say you're going to do something, but life gets to you, you're busy. And a lot of times, like, it's actually hard to find that, hey, I'm going to do this, I will do it. And then we're called raised capital for a reason. Second thing is, it is really about speed, because we can have a lot of good idea. By the way, I started my career as an engineer when I really have nothing to do, which is usually weekend. When I have an idea, I actually like building websites. And so what I usually do to start is I just put up a landing page and I'll just put it out there. Not build anything on the back end, but just to test the market. Hey, is that a lot of people sign up for this idea? Just to put it out there and see if there's any wants and needs. And so sometimes, you know, speed is really important. Be the man of your word. If you say you're gonna do it, just do it. Be honest, because you see, like, people who, particularly with VC, like, VC just meets so many people, they can smell it. That's why I think it's almost better that you say you don't know and ask for help. These are, like, just really basic thing, but between sort of, like, do what you say you would do and then be man of your words and speed, just to start is a really great start if you're an engineer.
I love that, because in my era, there's always a secret formula. One business guy plus a manager plus an engineer will make a good couple. So I hear you. It's more like the character and the spirit and the. Actually, this is supposedly what Hong Kong people are very good at, right? They can do spirit, I should say. So we're hopeful. Now, Edith, we have a few people who actually are dialing live and want to ask a question. And if you don't mind, I'll introduce them to the audience. The first one is Professor Albert Ip, who is a colleague of mine actually at the council at HKUST. So he has some brilliant questions he wants to ask. So can we have Albert dialing? Albert, are you here? Not yet?
Coming.
Can you hear me?
All right, Albert, welcome to the chat group. Albert is a long-term supporter of HKUST and whom you have met. And Albert, fire away your question.
We'll do. Very good session. I think Edith, very comprehensive. I think means a lot to the students. Give them some food for thought about what you do, courses to focus on. I think the question I asked is already answered partly, so I'm going to add a little bit flavor to it. The question I would like to ask is, before one invests in a startup, what are the areas to evaluate before you decide to go ahead? And I, as a banker, I like to see if there are numbers that you have seen being successful, like what kind of rate of return you want to get, the payback period, how do you adjust the risk, how do you analyze the liquidity in terms of banking support. In those veins, can you elaborate a little bit further to what you and Jack have been discussing? Thank you.
All right, Edith. Typical question now from my ex-banker. All right, Edith, fire away, please.
Yeah, so Albert, to answer your question, and by the way, it's good, and these are, it's good also for an entrepreneur to understand as well. So most of the venture capital fund, at least in the US, China is a little bit different. China is actually sometimes a little shorter time frame, but typical venture capital fund in the US is usually 10 years long. And the investment periods is usually the first 3 to 5 years. So you can imagine, which by the way, it is actually a good tip to also think about, is if any of you are looking at a potential VC to pitch, and you notice a lot of it's my job actually to evaluate, right? To put ourselves out there so people know that we want to invest. So if a fund announced their fund, and then the first 3 years, they're super active investing. And that's why you always see another fund, another fund, another fund. And so I particularly focus on early stage. So I'm stuck in Silicon Valley, so I can only tell you US numbers. Because we focus on early stage these days, in terms of valuation, different region is a little bit different. I'm talking about Silicon Valley. I'm seeing, by the way, 500 startups, the valuation is always 2.5 million, and incubator style is always sort of like a flat 150K for 7% of the company. And usually in terms of return, you can think about many different ways. The only way for us to not crash and burn and make any return whatsoever from any tech companies are usually either through an IPO. So in my case with Agora, it was 7 years, or through an exit. So this year, which is really interesting, even though all of us under COVID, particularly in Hong Kong, which thanks to also a lot of turmoil between China and US, a lot of Chinese companies are going public in Hong Kong. So it's really, really great actually for Hong Kong as a stock market. But overall worldwide, what we're seeing, M&A is not as active because IPO is so active. So in some sense, the way for a VC to get return is through these, or a third way is sometimes as an early investor, let's say, although SoftBank is not doing that well, but at one point when SoftBank first came into Uber, they actually bought out a lot of shares from the early investor for early Uber investors. So in this case, it's not M&A, it's not IPO, it's a later stage investor will buy into early stage investor stake. So that happened as well. It's hard to, like, I really, so by the way, I think Albert is an amazing investor and banker. So, so let's say, for example, our current fund IRR, which by the way is not fair because we're early stage. So even though our fund IRR now is like 70-some%, it does not equal, because it's time, right? So therefore, what is really matter at the end of the day is the actual cash return. So sometimes like I also invested in fund before. I'm like, this IRR seems interesting, but at the end of the day is really about how big this company we think will turn, how big it can turn into. So in our mind is every single companies, if we don't think this could be a unicorn, which is $1 billion company, because I'm early stage investor, we really shouldn't invest because it will not return the fund. So every single company we're looking at, we're like, will this return the fund equal to, can this be a unicorn? Because we're so early, usually we'll invest, let's say first check for us is anywhere up to 2 million US, and we're early. So sometimes we will, own, let's say 15 or 20% of a company. So if that's the case, our fund is only so big. By the way, if you're a later stage, it's purely financials. So let's say you only invest in pre-IPO, then it's all about the numbers. For us, is really all about the people. But really quick, since we have so many people on the Zoom, is to be even more specific. If you're a consumer startup, the first question I will always ask you, and let's say you're a mobile app, what's your install base? What's your monthly active, daily active? What's your churn? What's your retention rate? If you do monetize, how would you monetize? What's the potential ARPU, average revenue per user? These are for consumer. If you're for B2B, SaaS, even you don't make money, it's fine. Do you understand your sales cycle? What's the contract value? What's the LTV? How long is your sales cycle? It's very, very metric driven, even though you don't make money. So sorry, it's such a long-winded answer, but we are very, very metric driven. And I think you as an entrepreneur should do that too. And a great investor will always ask you and quiz you on these numbers.
Thank you.
That's great, and thanks, Albert. We have another dial-in from Marco Clark. Marco is a 4th-year aerospace engineering student. And Marco, are you online?
Yep, I'm here. Hi,
Go ahead,
Jack.
Marco, ask your question.
All right. Yeah. Hi, Edith. So thank you for taking the time to shed light for investment during this environment. So I'm Marco. I'm born and raised in Hong Kong as well. And I'm a 4th-year aerospace engineering, as Jack's mentioned. And recently I've co-founded a Geron technology startup that is based on light therapy, where now near-infrared light is used for cosmetics, athletes, but now we're trying to use it to focus on cognitive health. And currently a challenge I'm sort of facing is dealing with the prospect of graduation. And as you've all touched on already, the pressure of having to sort of go towards a traditional job route. And it's especially daunting during these environments. And I want to ask, having dealt with corporate and startup mindsets, what is the main difference between someone who does work on a startup in their mindset and someone who works in a corporate environment? And a second question I have is that early stage startups such as ourselves is like, we don't have a lot of leverage to investors. So what is a really good time to start approaching investors, and how should we sort of go about that? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Marco, for your question. So I actually started a job. Like when I first graduated, my journey was, I started as an engineer. My first job was actually at a consulting firm called AMS. And then I joined a company called Sibo System doing CRM. And then I went to Oracle and I went to Autodesk. I never regret the experience I have. And in fact, particularly, I think building technology companies, there's plenty of great, and all these companies, by the way, at least I think, I don't know about Autodesk, but Oracle definitely have a Hong Kong office. And so are many like these big tech companies, giants. And I think it's really good to actually learn the rope and the know-how and somehow sort of how these bigger companies actually build tech product. And really learn it with the mindset is that knowing that, you know what, and by the way, and a lot of entrepreneurs love doing that to us actually. And if you are like an ex-Facebook, ex-Google, I can tell you, you will have an easier time raising money. So in some sense, sort of always treat it as this is just another part of the journey, even you get a job somewhere. But I have to tell you, being somebody who worked in corporate for 10 years and then switched, in fact, when I decided to build my first company, honestly, I didn't know what I want to build. I just realized I can't work in a corporate job anymore. I quit my job. I didn't talk to my mother for like 1.5 years. She thought that I was either pregnant or I was on drugs. And then 1.5 years later, I came back to Hong Kong. I was on some whatever panel, and then there was some journal wrote about what I was doing. And then she finally was like, oh, you started a company? And in that sense, it's like worse than me on drugs. So in some sense, I find that the mindset of being in corporate, when I first sort of like slowly turned into doing more startup related things, I had a very hard time sort of trying to first ask for help, because I felt like I had to do everything myself. And when you are in a corporate job, you're very focused on one thing and do it really well. And it's almost sort of like when you first started as a founder, you need to be a Swiss Army knife. Like you need to be able to do a lot of things. And then later on is to don't do any of these. You need to like find people who are really good at each thing. So I think we are all trained as a really good employee. When what are most of the things that we learn in school make me a very good employee. And then I realized, man, like I can't do everything anymore. So that was like a big shift for me. And it took me at least a good ½ year to get to a point where I need to ask for help. Your second question related to approaching investor. By the way, there's no best time or worst time. And I do think COVID time is a really great time because everybody's stuck at home. So yeah, I don't have any other thing to do but to actually on Zoom like all night and all day. So I will talk to you next week. But the key thing is the key thing is to like create opportunity so you become a irresistible founder that the VC will want to chase after you. Well, how do you do that? Well, just to start with, it's always sort of the other way around. And that's what, and by the way, I don't count media coverage as an accomplishment because it's not an accomplishment. But it is something that actually is good for eyeballs for investors. So and usually the TechCrunch article, honestly, is going to score you a few things: more investor and hiring, because now you sort of legitimize yourself. So think about when you approach investors, it's always, number one, it's so much better to get an intro from someone that the investor either have invested in or have co-investment with. Or if Jack or Tim or Albert or Diana like want to like introduce, of course I'm going to talk to any referral that they introduce me to, because they're great people, introduce another. So it's always kind of think about, and then also make sure that you approach investor with the right kind of investor. And honestly, I know nothing about, actually you taught me a word the other day, like the photo bio. I have to Google it. I will be a horrible investor for you because I have no idea what you're building. But they're always a good investor for your specific region, industry, your stage. And it's actually our job to be as transparent as possible so we don't waste your time. Anyways, hopefully it's helpful. I can talk about this all night long or all day long, but we will stop here for now.
Yeah, thank you, Edith.
Great. Well, thank you, Marco. And Edith, you should definitely look up Marco's near-infrared light therapy, supposedly to help everybody look beautiful and healthier too as well. And Marco just won the MIT Innovation Note Award challenge. So it's another proud HKUST student. Now we have another student who is really interested in asking a question, and we have a lady student who is a first year business school in risk management and business intelligence. El-san, it's originally from Beijing. Nice background, El. So go ahead, please ask Edith your question.
Yeah, hi, I'm Elle, the year 2 RMBS student, and thank you for sharing. I really learned a lot unique perspectives about entrepreneurship today. And yeah, so I haven't go that far like Marco in this journey, but I've been trying to run a small online platform to teach little kids sports classes online with like educational activities. So I might be like an entrepreneur in the future. And my question is like, as a woman entrepreneur, do you feel like women have a relatively inferior voice in the tech industry compared to men? Yeah.
Well, I'm obviously a woman, and I think that it's interesting. I actually, we have some study, particularly more, this is more, I actually do think China is relatively better, like in terms of having women VC and women founder. But in the US, unfortunately, like you would definitely see women in general a little bit less underrepresented, and both in the venture and also in founding companies. It's all both like less than 12%. But what's really interesting, which that's why sometimes is also worldwide, and this is honestly, I don't know if you guys know, but if you were to guess, what's the percentage in terms of overall, like worldwide purchasing decision that is made by women? It's actually 85%. And honestly, you don't even need numbers. You just need to ask your mother, you know. Like just look at your own family. Who make the call? And most of the purchase is women. So I do think that a lot of the purchase decisions being done by women, but at the same time, in terms of founding companies and VCs are not enough. So I think is a good time, really. I think the whole industry actually want more women to involve to start companies. It's a really, really good time for women entrepreneurs like to build and slowly sort of like to invest. But the key thing I think for what I don't want is I hate to be the the women card in any of these like panel or like, I think all of us, regardless you men or women, is not necessary. If you're really great at what you do, it doesn't matter you're men or women. But I do think sometimes it's good to see other people that look like you, then it encourages you to do more. So hopefully, let's give it another 10. And Ali or Al, there's VIP kids for teaching English. There got to be a VIP kids for learning sports. So there's already, Cindy is already a great example with what you want to do potentially. The founder CEO of VIP Kids. So therefore, I think that you already have a great role model. But yes, I think women entrepreneur, we should do more. And yes, we need to ask for help, and we need more women engineers.
Well, great, Al. This is gender is an important topic, and a lot of people are interested. And thank you, Edith. So I didn't realize, I'm looking at the clock. It's almost an hour, and I don't want to lose you, Edith. But I have 2 more questions to ask you before you go. The first question is a heavier one, and then follow up with a lighter question. The heavier question is that Edith, we need some takeaway pointers out of this fireside chat. Give us 3 takeaway pointers on fundraising tactics. This seems to be the general consensus from the audience. They want to ask you for the magic wand. What are the 3 things that they need to take away from this 1 hour of chatting with you?
Yeah, I think. By the way, I actually have a deck in terms of like how to pay an investor that I presented at Hong Kong UST a few years ago. It's on SlideShare. If you just Google my name, SlideShare, you should be able to find like 7 habits for pitching investor. But if we are talking, and plus, especially during COVID time, and it's different, like if we're face to face, because obviously I wanted to get to know you. But during COVID, if you have a product, number 1 is actually, I would love to see a demo. And then second, if you have numbers, you really have to know your numbers. You can't check with anybody else. It's not, oh, let me check on it and get back to you later. You know your number by heart. And then last but not least is you really need to understand who your customers are and why your product, and how you can become the painkiller. Even though your customers groups could be very small at the beginning, it's okay. So those would be the 3 things that I look forward to learning more during our Zoom conversation if we talk.
No, Edith, that's great. But you and I have the same problem. I mean, at university, 7 years is like 3 generations. But I definitely asked the team to upload the slideshow, and I'm sure people will be interested in learning all the 7 habits, and if not more. Now, the last fun question, Edith, I've been dying to ask you, and then this turns out to be my habit now. It's a fun thing. During the downtime, you probably read a lot of books, do a lot of things to enhance your intelligence, get more information, and entertain yourself at the same time. So tell me, if you are to recommend some movies for our entrepreneur prospect to watch, what should they do? Now we have all the time to watch any movies we want, by the way.
I would say if you want to learn about the history of Silicon Valley, there is a documentary called Something Ventured. I think you can even find it for free. I think on YouTube, it's actually really great to just learn the history, because history tends to repeat itself. And I can't wait to see a Hong Kong documentary that talk about our tech ecosystem soon. And then my recent favorite is definitely the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance. Is on Netflix. Man, it's definitely poetry in motion. He is so amazing. But the biggest thing that I take away from the documentary, which have everything to do with the entrepreneurial spirit, is that if you don't give it your all to do every single thing that in front of you, why live? And you look at the attitude of Michael Jordan, he's so focused. Every single game, he just give it his all. And I think no matter what you guys are doing, building companies or getting a job, doesn't really matter. Give 100%, 500% of yourself. And don't waste your time, because time is just something that is so valuable. And we all only live once. So that would be my favorite.
Wow, that's something that we should all watch. Michael Jordan, Last Dance on Netflix. Maybe something for us to, all these sports athletes, they are giants in their own universe, and something that we can all learn from. No, Edith, I don't know how to thank you. It's a valuable time. I've been told that you haven't had dinner yet, and yet you are just full of energy. I can't believe that you have done already 10 portfolio examinations today and get time to talk to us, and you look just fantastic and energetic. Maybe that's something that we need to figure out how you do that next time when we meet. But thank you again, Edith, and thank you for all the audience to this Fireside Chat from HKUST. And wherever you are, we hope that you stay safe and healthy. And we look forward to seeing every one of you face to face in no time. Good night and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Bye.
Bye.